Hello viewers, welcome back. I have been waiting to make this review ever since I put up the half for the anime. I will be paraphrasing all the plot important things here, but this review mostly exists so that I can discuss all the major spoilers to the story that the anime doesn't go into. So if you want a more overarching look at all of the characters, I suggest you go watch my review of the anime first. To set up the story for anyone new, our main protagonist and narrator is a high school girl named Mai Taniyama, and the very first chapter opens up with Mai and her friends telling ghost stories after school. This is something they do fairly often, but today turns out to be special because they are interrupted by a boy who introduces himself as Kazuya Shibuya. He tells them that he runs a psychic research center and has been hired to investigate the old, supposedly haunted schoolhouse they were just telling stories about. After this encounter, Mai goes to do a little investigating herself, accidentally injures this boy's assistant in the process, and ends up working for him so she can pay him back for the camera that was also broken. She soon takes to calling her boss Naru, as in short for narcissist, and believe me, there will be more on that later. Anyway, probably because he is only 17, technically 16 at the start of the story, Mai's principal starts to have some doubts about whether Naru can get the job done. So as backup, he calls in Masako Hara, a famous televised medium, Hosho Takigawa, a monk who they soon just start calling Monk, Ayako Matsuzaki, a self-styled shrine maiden, and John Brown, a Catholic priest from Australia. And how the characters all interact as a group is something I loved about Ghost Hunt from the very beginning. It'll come up again later, but I'll say it now. This series isn't great with character development in either format. It was something I mentioned I wanted to see expanded on in my anime review. You get a little more here, but with the exception of Naru, the manga doesn't reveal much more about the other characters' backstories. But they all have very distinct personalities, and I loved their group dynamic. The specific details of this first case actually aren't that important to a general description of this story. The important thing is that from here on out, they're basically one big team, and the general overview of this story is that this group goes on to have a bunch of other ghost hunting adventures, along with Naru's first assistant, Lin, who does make a full recovery, and Yasuhara, a third assistant that they kind of just pick up while investigating a case at his high school. Very early into her new part-time job, Mai starts exhibiting her own signs of psychic abilities. She starts to have visions, usually in the form of dreams, that give her special insights into whatever case the gang is investigating at the time. In these dreams, she is guided along by a much nicer version of her boss, or who she believes to be a dream version of Naru anyway. I stated at the beginning of this review that I plan to spoil everything. This is your last warning. If you don't want to hear the final volume discussed in detail, leave now. Still here? Excellent, let's do this then. What frustrated me most about the anime, because I knew the major plot twist going into it, was that there was a lot of build-up that they never delivered on. It was mostly just little things that they didn't have to add in that raised some questions. For example, when Mai first calls her boss by the nickname Naru, of all the possible reactions, he responds with, "Where did you hear that name?" As a whole, the anime was very faithful to the manga. Anyone who watched the anime could probably just skip straight to volume 10. There were only a few extra hints that the anime didn't add in. One is that when Naru spends all that time cooped up in his office, he's looking over maps of Japan, and Mai also mentions he disappears a lot and he always comes back from these mysterious day trips in a bad mood. The manga goes on for 3 more volumes after the anime ends. There is one more case, and I was going to skip over volumes 10 and 11 and get straight to the big reveal, but their final case is a really interesting one, and it does set up volume 12. So volume 9 ends with Naru revealing his own psychic powers, landing him in the hospital. Volume 10 picks up with Naru being discharged. By this time, the group has been together long enough and been through enough to be considered more friends than co-workers. So they all show up at the hospital to help him pack up his things and all that, but they get lost on the way back and end up at a lakeside campground up in the mountains. To back up for a second, a very basic definition of psychometry is when a person is able to discern certain facts about someone else by touching or being in close proximity to something that person owned. For example, when Masako was missing in the blood-stained labyrinth case, after they find her, Naru drops one of her hair ornaments. He was carrying around something that belonged to her in the hopes that it would help him figure out her location. I don't remember if any of the characters had actually come out and said Naru was a psychometrist at this point, but it was one of those things that should have been obvious to the readers by now. And it explains his sudden epiphany when he goes to look at the lake and realizes this is the place he's been searching for this whole time. After a bit more mystery and the gang deciding to rent cabins for a while, Mai finally gets Naru to tell her that the only reason he opened the office in the first place is because he's been looking for his brother's body. This is the explanation behind all his mystery trips, and he tells her that once the divers find his body, he'll shut down the office. He agrees to take a local case while they're waiting, and this last case was an interesting one for a few reasons. For one, it was nostalgic. Their very first case together was in a haunted schoolhouse, and so is this last one. And more importantly, they're all very aware of this being their last case together. This is just as sentimental and sweet as it is sad and creepy. The ghosts turn out to be a bus full of children and their teacher who died during a field trip. One by one, they all get separated, and Mai finally gets to exorcise a ghost herself. If you want to call it that, I'll have to double-check the technical definition of an exorcism. This whole time, she's been having dreams connected to their cases. Now, when she's all alone, Dream Naru teaches her to go into a trance so she can talk to the children's teacher and convince him to let everyone move on, despite how tragic it is that they died so young. And then the group reconnects, and it's all sweet and emotional, or it was for me anyway, and they go back to their cabins. And then the real fun begins. Half of Volume 12 is an interrogation scene. Monk, John, and Yasu have been puzzling through some of the things about Naru that don't make sense, and once they all acknowledge that they may never see each other after this, they basically corner him and force him to listen to their theories. There was one last hint that I didn't mention. This series is very good about incorporating actual research and giving the ghost hunting a scientific feel. There is a real-life SPR in England, and Ghost Hunt introduces a fake member, the esteemed Dr. Oliver Davis, a British parapsychologist who's known for his powerful PK, but rarely appears in public, so no one knows much about him. During the Bloodstained Labyrinth case, in both the manga and the anime, the group works with a man who turns out to be impersonating Dr. Davis, but there is one difference the manga has to offer. Oliver Davis and his research is mentioned a lot, but in the manga, from the very beginning, there's also mention of Eugene Davis, Dr. Davis's brother, who also has impressive spiritual powers. Even if you know nothing about this series apart from what you may have learned in this review, I'm sure you can see where this is going. I'll summarize Monk's really detailed, drawn-out interrogation. They deduce that their SPR is actually a Japanese office of the British organization, and that Naru himself is not actually Japanese. The most important point here is that Kazuya Shibuya is an alias, and Naru is his real name. In a sense. Remember that he recognized the nickname the first time Mai used it, and Monk points out that it would be a little out of character for Lin to address his boss using a nickname that stems from narcissist. So it's times like this that they're lucky to have someone like John around who knows the English language quite well. Nal is a nickname for Oliver, but when said with a Japanese accent, it comes out sounding like Naru. There was something interesting about this explanation that requires explaining something else. I ended my anime review with the ominous message that the manga may be a little difficult to get your hands on. It was being translated and published in English by a company called Del Rey Manga, which was taken over by Kodansha Comics after the release of Volume 11. As far as I know, Kodansha did pick up most of Del Rey's titles, but not Ghost Hunt. The series has been out of print for a while, but you can still find it. It's finding it at a reasonable price that's the challenge, and to this day, the Ghost Hunt manga is left without an official English translation for the 12th and final volume. But the internet is a wonderful place. There is a fan translation out there for those willing to look for it. Normally, I would not be encouraging others to embrace something of such dubious legality, but in this case, well, you can't expect me to get 11 volumes in, end it on a cliffhanger, and then expect me to just let it go. That's all I'm gonna say on the subject. Where was I going with this? Oh right, the explanation of Naru's name. So, overall, the translation of Volume 12 that I found seemed pretty good to me. There were a few occasions where things may have been translated a little too literally, but everything else made sense. But there was one sort of conflict here. In Volume 1, Naru reacts to Mai's nickname in more ways than one. There's the familiarity, for one, but also, the next time he addresses her, he doesn't attach an honorific onto the end of her name. When she calls him out on this, he responds by telling her that she didn't address him using an honorific either. In Volume 12, anyway. The memory of this scene in Volume 12 is a little different from how it was actually translated in Volume 1. In the official English translation that Del Rey published, Mai doesn't accuse him of skipping the honorifics. She just reacts in surprise that he called her by her first name. I suspect Del Rey changed this on purpose, thinking it would make more sense to their English readers and not knowing that it would be important to the story later on. It's been established by now that Naru is actually Oliver Davis. The point of that scene was that Nal was a childhood nickname, and it surprised him to hear Mai use it, not realizing she meant something completely different. I don't speak Japanese at all, and my knowledge of how the language is structured and all that is limited, but I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on this scene at least. Someone you don't know very well not attaching an honorific onto your name is about the Japanese equivalent of someone you just met suddenly using a childhood nickname that only family and really close friends know. Naru may actually be of Japanese heritage, which I'll explain in a second, but remember that he's actually Oliver Davis. He grew up in England and is used to speaking English, so his misinterpretation of Mai's nickname in Volume 1 is the first odd thing that Monk latches onto. Even up to this point, Eugene Davis isn't of much importance. They come to the conclusion that if Naru is actually Oliver, then Eugene must be dead, but even this doesn't have much meaning until Mai and Naru have their own private conversation away from the group. So Mai is an emotional wreck by this point, and she finally comes clean about how each of her dreams has included a nice version of Naru, one who always smiles and looks out for her. But the real Naru doesn't mock her the way she expects him to. When he hears about her dream during their most recent case, how Dream Naru taught her to go into a trance and all that, Naru tells her that it's not him, that this whole time the Naru in her dreams has actually been his brother, Jean. The reveal was something the writers were very aware of, I guess I'll say. Up until this scene, Eugene is referred to exclusively as Naru's older brother. It's only during this big reveal scene that Naru tells her he and Jean are actually identical twins with very different personalities. Jean stuck around after his death to act as Mai's spirit guide while Naru looks for his body, and going into a trance to communicate with spirits was something that he was well known for. And this is where the psychometry comes back in. Jean was in Japan studying exorcisms when he died. Naru was back in England at this time, and he had a vision when he went to borrow some of his brother's clothing. Basically, Jean was hit by a car while in this village. When the driver realized what had happened, she panicked, hit him again to make sure he was dead, and then dumped his body in the lake. Mai also tells Naru she's in love with him at this time, and I don't have as much to say on that subject as I thought I would. I mean, there's her horrendous timing for one thing. Like, Mai, we are literally bringing up his twin brother's corpse as we speak. You really want to do this right now? But at any rate, he promptly rejects her, telling her that it's Jean she's in love with, not him. Lin comes running a second later to tell them the divers have found him, and there are just 2 scenes left. Naru's parents fly to Japan once they hear their son's body has been identified. Martin and Luella Davis were a British couple who adopted Nal and Jean, so I believe Japanese was Naru's first language, because their mother tells Mai that's how they used to communicate with each other. Anyway, it's mostly just narration, but it's a really sweet and sad scene. Luella gives Mai a picture of the twins when they were younger. The group all returns to Tokyo to lock up the office one last time, although with the promise that Naru and Lin will return sometime after Jean's funeral, and then Naru returns to England and the group parts ways. I'm pretty sure this review has already reached an unreasonable length, so I'll try to wrap this up quickly. The author did write a 2-volume sequel that was also never officially translated into English, and I can't say I really want to go looking for it. As much as a part of me wants to see the group reconnect and go on more ghost adventures together, I also really liked how Ghost Hunt ended. The big mysteries were solved, Jean's body was found, and there is the promise that the story will go on someday, even if we're not around to see it. From a critical standpoint, I can't say Ghost Hunt was the most amazing thing ever made, but I fell in love with it. The first time I read Volume 12, I just felt kind of empty inside. The second time, I got to the scene where Naru goes to identify his brother's body and started crying, and there aren't an abundance of series that have honestly made me cry. And now I've read it to completion 4 times, and I'm coming to terms with the fact that there are just some stories that are going to rip your heart out unapologetically. I love the ghost hunting aspect of this story, and I love the characters and all their interactions. For the sake of time, the discussion of character development and where it might have fallen short is going to be its own video, but this is where I want to leave this review. Ghost Hunt is, I feel, one of the more underappreciated anime and manga series out there, and I definitely suggest checking it out yourself if you haven't been put off by my spoiling the final plot twist. But even if not, thank you for watching.